A joint statement is calling on the federal government to urgently introduce rental reforms. Fair limits on rent increases and putting an end to no-cause evictions are among key demands of a coalition of advocacy groups asking for changes. Joining me live is Leo Patterson-Ross, CEO of the Tenants Union of New South Wales. Thanks for your time. I guess just starting off with the situation we're at right now, do you agree that things have been getting better for renters? And I know it's sort of jurisdictions do differ, but there's a lot more rights around pets. There's a lot more rights around when people have to leave at the end of a lease and so on. I mean, it's an improving landscape, isn't it?
There's certainly been improvements in states like Victoria and particularly the ACT this year, but there's a lot of room to improve. And we know that some of these recommendations, for instance, the ACT became only the first jurisdiction in Australia to end no grounds evictions. Victoria, Queensland, Tasmania have made modifications, but they haven't done all of the work. But ultimately, there's a lot of improvement in the relationship between landlords and tenants to give everybody in the sector more certainty, more stability, and just a better relationship that people don't feel in conflict so much of the time.
So on the rent aspect, because that's the hottest issue right now for renters, when you talk about fair increases, how would you sum up what a fair increase is?
So a fair increase is one that takes into account the tenant's capacity to pay and the tenants as a whole capacity to pay, as well as looking at costs of providing the service, making sure that there is enough to continue to do repairs and maintenance. But we have seen from things like tax data, from various studies, that repairs, maintenance, all these other costs are easily covered by the rent. What's not so easily covered is the interest payable, and that is much more better sort of categorized as an investment strategy. So someone has decided to borrow a particular amount of money to buy a particular asset and hope that that asset will appreciate fast enough. That's really separate and a separate question from the tenancy management and what it costs to provide a service of a well-maintained home.
But it has to be part of the equation, doesn't it? We're in a situation in which we've had the fastest rate of increase in terms of interest rates in history. So there'd be people out there with an investment property that went in with a reasonable plan that you alluded to there. They weren't expecting the value to double in a year or so, but they're paying hundreds of dollars extra a month in their interest payments, and they might be struggling to afford the property. So in that situation, how do you assess how much of that extra cost is fair to pass on?
What we really need to do is make sure that investors are well educated in their investment decisions, they've been given good financial planning advice, and haven't been misled into making investments that are really beyond their capacity to pay. And I think we also need to give people who would like to invest in property more options of how they're going to do that, so that they don't have to take on all the risks of investment as an individual who might not have all the resources. What we've done in Australia is encourage a lot of people to invest in property and take on the risk, but not giving them the support to actually provide the services. So really, this is a longer conversation that we need to reset the expectations from banks, from government, as well as from individual investors and renters.
In terms of what a rental property is worth, does it go back to the market ultimately? Because there are situations where, it might be this is not the case right now, but it's happened in the past, it will again. It's a really bad market for a landlord. They rent out their property maybe for $100 less a week than they thought they would because they just want to get someone in. 2 years later, the market's much better and they go, oh, thank God I can, up my rent to what the market is actually tolerating. But you go, oh no, hang on, here's the amount. You have to do it 5% and it can't be more than every 2 years. That person's sort of doomed to forever get less than their property's worth. Is that a bit of an anomaly as well that's difficult to deal with?
Yeah. Well, so look, how we deal with rent increases and the rents at the beginning of a tenancy, these are all questions that should be discussed, and we should make sure that it is a well-functioning system that encourages well-maintained properties, new properties that continue to meet the needs of the community. But we also need to make sure that there are a range of mechanisms doing that. We can't put all of the burden on, an individual who's invested in one, maybe two properties. What I think that the dynamic that we see sometimes when the markets get softer for investors, we saw this particularly in COVID, is that some of our mechanisms, particularly negative gearing, for instance, act as a bit of a parachute. They distort the market response, and so people don't decrease the rent as much as they might have been expected to, because you can still claim the lost rent as a tax deduction. But on the flip side, there's no parachute on prices rising. So we really need just a more balanced, more stable market that encourages long-term investment rather than short-term.
Leo, got to go. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.